Dipa Ma. Preface. Discovering Dipa Ma. Long before I ever heard her name, Dipa Ma was calling to me. When I was 19, someone handed me a copy of Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. I read it 4 times and underlined almost every sentence. The book offered me hope. It said, and I desperately wanted it to be true, that there was a way out of suffering, that it was possible to be free in this human life. I began to practice transcendental meditation, but I didn't find my way to the Dharma, or Buddhist teaching, until 5 years later. At a back alley coffee house in Seattle called the Allegro, I saw a flyer advertising a Dharma group posted on their bulletin board. I was curious, so I dropped in. Someone instructed me in sitting meditation. Immediately, I sensed that I'd found something deep and meaningful in this practice, something I knew I had to stay with. A teacher from Thailand visited the group and spoke about enlightenment. He said it was the goal of meditation and that it was, quote, indescribable, beyond body and mind, beyond all suffering. What intrigued me more than what he said, however, was what remained unspoken, the mystical silence surrounding his words, the deep calm in his eyes. That night, walking home in the rain, I was brought to a halt by a strong sensation. With the rain pouring down my face in the darkness, I vowed to dedicate the rest of my life to finding enlightenment. No matter how long it took, no matter what it took, I knew I would not stop until I had experienced that peace for myself. From time to time, Buddhist teachers came to visit our group. A man who had been ordained in Burma, now Myanmar, several monks from the Thai tradition. Invariably, these were male teachers who talked about their male teachers. Where are the women in this tradition? I wondered. Where are my mentors? Hoping to learn more about women in Buddhism, I began to read the Buddhist texts, which left me more discouraged. Not only were women seldom mentioned, but in general the ancient writings presented a disparaging view of us. Like other women of that era, I abandoned my notions of female Buddhist role models, and just dove into my own practice. After 5 years of strenuous effort, I began to feel the need for longer periods of intensive practice. Several friends told me about the 3-month retreat held every fall at the Insight Meditation Society, IMS, in Barre, Massachusetts. I applied and was accepted. 3 months of silence. Many of my friends thought I was crazy. The year was 1989. The Retreat Center, founded by meditation teachers Sharon Salzberg, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, and others, is surrounded by woods and fields. The main building is a stately old brick structure, a lieutenant governor's private mansion built in 1911. After the bustle of unpacking boxes and meeting my Swiss roommate, I took a guided tour of the maze of buildings where I would be living and practicing for the next 90 days. As I looked around the place, I noticed figures of the Buddha and pictures of teachers, inspiring icons of spiritual encouragement placed thoughtfully in every nook and cranny. All these images of men. Then, suddenly, off in the corner of room M101, I spotted a photograph of an Indian woman dressed in white, seated like a puff of white cloud on a green summer lawn. See the color insert of this book. She wore heavy-rimmed eyeglasses, repaired with a strip of white tape. Behind the glasses was the most serene, loving gaze I had ever seen. There was no name on the picture, but I knew that I was looking at a great master, a woman who had found deep freedom. I wondered if the teachers would tell us about her. I wondered if she might be my mentor. I didn't have to wait long for an answer. A few days into the retreat, the teachers began to speak about the woman in the picture. Born Nanibala Borua, but known to all as Dipa Ma, mother of Dipa. She had died only 2 weeks before. Each of the 5 teachers had known her personally and had loved her deeply. 2 of them had been her students for nearly 20 years. Grief was still fresh in their hearts. I felt dismayed that I would never get to meet this woman. Then it dawned on me. Through the stories I was hearing and the inspiration they imparted, Dipa Ma was already becoming my mentor. I felt a strong kinship with her. There were so many similarities between her story and my own. She had experienced profound suffering in her life when, at the age of 12, she was separated from her family and married off according to Indian custom. My own world also changed abruptly and irrevocably at the age of 12. I woke up one morning to discover that my mother, to whom I was deeply attached, had tried to commit suicide the night before. Even though she did not succeed until several years later, the effect on me was utterly devastating. As it had happened for Dipa Ma, my childhood ended suddenly, literally overnight. Other events in my teens and 20s seemed to parallel some of the losses and struggles Dipa Ma experienced before she discovered meditation practice. As a child, I had loved the stories my mother told me about African Americans, who, despite the odds, rose above their suffering to become great leaders and teachers. Mahalia Jackson, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Paul Robeson, Marian Anderson, Frederick Douglass, Rosa Parks. These were my childhood heroes and heroines. How, I wanted to know, had Dipa Ma, an ordinary housewife, overcome not only personal difficulties, but also the patriarchal constraints of Asian culture, and then gone on to practice and teach in ways highly uncommon for her time. Although she never identified herself as a feminist or a minority leader, Dipa Ma reminded me of my childhood heroes in her example of strength in the face of adversity. I was eager to follow in her footsteps. I wanted to know everything about her. I met with Joseph Goldstein at the end of the 3-month retreat and asked if he or any other teacher was planning to write about Dipa Ma. No, he said, no one that he knew of. He certainly didn't have the time to do it. Then, with characteristic ebullience, he said, "You should do it." For days, I pondered his suggestion. How could I possibly write about someone who I had never met? Several friends pointed out that of the millions who follow the Buddha's teachings in the 2,500 years since he lived, only a handful knew him personally. The same, of course, is true for Jesus, Muhammad, and other spiritual leaders. Their stories are their living texts. So I began my search for Dipa Ma through the accounts of those who had known her. For 8 years, I collected stories about her from her students throughout the United States and in India and Myanmar. Every step of the journey, every meeting and every parting, every conversation and remembrance was linked by love. Love of Dipa Ma, love of the Buddhist path, love of this precious life. The Buddha described the spiritual teachings as beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, and beautiful in the end. As I listened to people's stories, Dipa Ma's teaching manifested that beauty again and again. Even in death, she lives on in people's hearts. Many students say that they feel she continues to guide their practice. Some who have never met her report that she helps them in their meditation or visits them in dreams. Some say they hear her voice, others that they feel her presence. For many years now, I have heard accounts of how Dipa Ma continues to guide people. Through these accounts and my own experiences, I feel certain that the power of her practice is still available to each one of us. No matter how lost we feel within ourselves, or how desperate the world situation seems, if we call upon her, she usually appears from the inside, showing us the truth which is always here. May these stories guide you on your spiritual journey. May all beings be free. End of introduction.